Good morning, and first, my name's Sam Byrne. I'm the Secretary of the Co-op Federation. Thank you very much for coming, particularly in with the latest cases in the eastern suburbs. My first job today is to introduce Uncle Alan Murray from the Metropolitan Aboriginal Land Council to give us a welcome to country. Thanks, Alan.
Good morning, and the word for welcome, Yama. Also, Yama means goodbye as well. That's in Gameroy. My name's Alan Murray. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for speaking to you. That was great. I'm okay to give up my seat if it's in the marketplace. It is from a song, but I'm a descendant from my mum from Walgett. She's a Gameroy woman. My dad's from Cummeragunja, between Echuca and Shepparton down in Victoria, on one of the biggest river system in Australia, and it's the Murray River, and that's on Yorta land. So my father was taken away at the age of 5. He's a stolen generation. So he was taken away and he was taken up to Kempsey. During the 1940s, Aboriginal children were taken away. At the age of 5, they were taken away on horse and sulky, taken to places like Coonamunra for the girls, and send the boys up to Kinchela. And the biggest, I suppose, concentration camp was Gesner in the middle of New South Wales, near Darlington Point. If you don't know your history, I know there are a lot of older Australians in here, please research your history when it comes to those who have been taken off land. If you don't know your clientele, where they come from, it's best to know it, because that'll make you a difference. It happened again. It happened. Well, this is my 15th welcome to country in the past 2 weeks, so I always tend to forget. I suppose one of those things about as you're getting older, you tend to forget the most important thing. Put your phone on silent. So if you've got a yarny barn like this, put it on silent. As I was saying, so if you don't know your clientele and where they come from, it's best to know so that you can have a good and honest relationship with First Nations people. I just want to acknowledge First Nations people in this room. Brother Jeff, well done. And also to acknowledge others who've travelled so far. Those who've come from, say, South Australia, Ngapiti. It's a Port Augusta term for the men up there. They're called 50-50 if you want to have a relationship with Aboriginal community, 50-50, Ngapiti. So I've been fortunate to travel Australia through my contacts, but more importantly, if I say this, underneath this carpet, underneath the concrete, down to the foundation is 40,000 years, 60,000 years, 120,000 years, whereby Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander have been on this continent called Australia, which is your home. But more importantly, if you've been a baby at one time, a teenager, adult, and a mature age adult, you are walking on Aboriginal land, Torres Strait Islander land. That's first step is important. For us, we've been here for thousands and thousands of years. We don't have a collective pronoun to say we've been here for thousands. We just say many more. And one of those things when you walk on this land, if you want to walk with Aboriginal people, Aboriginal people will walk with you. And that's one thing. Like the Uluru Statement from the Heart, our voices is not been heard. If we had a referendum tomorrow, we would like to have a change in the Constitution. I'm not going to say any more. But walking on Aboriginal land is so important. Establishing your footprint on our precious land is so important because this land is so valuable in its concentration, in its worth, and also the wealthy part of it, because the wealth has not been shared with us. We are the still poorest cohort of people in Australia. And you guys can make a difference. And with that difference, and I welcome you to Gadigal land, Aboriginal land. I pay respects to the Gadigal people, their elders past and present. And one of those things about here in Sydney, there are 26 clans that make up the Eora Nation. This is the facts, folks. This is the facts. There are 26 clans that make up the Eora Nation. There are only 3 descendants, 3 clans that are living today. And they couldn't even fill this room. Out of 23 clans, there are deceased. There are no descendants. So the land council structures here in New South Wales are the authority to speak on behalf of those who are deceased and their clans, but also we are the authority in terms of culture and heritage and protection. And with that, and one thing I say towards the end of Welcome to Country, respect one another, show the commitment and provide the leadership. I've just had my second coffee, don't have any more coffee. Thank you very much, have a nice day.
Thank you, Alan. Again, I'll just first thank you very much for coming. With all the challenges that we've had in the last few days and the last 2 years, I'd like to acknowledge the directors of the Federation are here, led by our chair, Richard O'Leary, who's here this morning, and particularly the distant travellers. There's some Victorians, some Queenslanders here. Victorians, we only decided to let you in a few days ago, or at midnight, so thank you very much for coming, and we really acknowledge that effort. And also to our people online who are watching online as well, thank you for tuning in. It has been 2 years since we've held a get-together. We were really desperate to persevere and do it this year. And it is great for us to be back together. And I think you'll have as much of the value as you'll get out of the sessions today and tomorrow, as much of the value as you get from those sessions, you'll get from the interactions with the people in the room. There's some great cooperative people in this room, and I'm sure that will be a very, very rich an experience for you. We face a whole lot of new challenges since the last time we came together. COVID's affected everyone, it's affected every individual, but it's also affected every one of our cooperatives. Some of our member cooperatives are not here anymore, are no longer here because of COVID. We've certainly lost some in recent times, and we're still losing some. But we're also, there's also some great energy in the cooperative sector. And with the power not vested in me, the one rule I'll make for the next 2 days is just that I don't want to hear people talk about co-ops as old school. We are new school, we are cutting edge, and there are lots of new, exciting, dynamic cooperative enterprises in Australia and across the world. In the last week or so, we've helped form 3 new cooperatives. One is Voices for Mallee, which is a community engagement, political community organisation in the west of Victoria, looking to stir things up and re-engage the community in the political process. We've helped a group of Burmese refugees form a co-op to lease some land to farm up near Coffs Harbour. And last night, Australia's newest co-op was formed, called Hotline Courier Co-op, a group of 5 cycle couriers in Sydney who are now forming a cooperative to deliver packages at the moment, but hopefully food, and to disrupt the big forces in food, the global forces in food delivery, part of a global network of cooperative courier cooperatives. So welcome to Hotline to the family. It was 6 p.m. last night at a pub just up the road that the five couriers got together, and it's going to be interesting and exciting to see how they go. We bring you together in our conference, in our assembly, to promote thought leadership, but also to talk very much about action. At the end of each day, we're going to try and bring together and summarise what's happened in the day, the new ideas, the interesting things. So that last plenary before drinks is well worth attending, and you'll find out what's happened in other sessions that you weren't able to attend. I think that's probably enough for me, and we did start a little bit late. There's a few housekeeping things that I need to run through. Really, if you want someone to come here or deliver, say the Teachers Federation in Mary Street, which is the entry just over here, you should be able to get the program easily with the QR code. There's a Wi-Fi code on the slides whizzing around. And that gives you access to the program. The toilets, there's toilets on both levels, so there's a ground floor and a first floor. The toilets are out here on the ground floor and in the middle at the back. We will have breaks. There's tea and coffee all day straight out the back in the middle here, but there's also the food will be in the sort of auditorium foyer over this side, and drinks will be in the heritage room, which is further over on the ground floor that side. Some of the meetings in the mornings will be in here, but in the afternoon some of the breakout meetings, and even this morning with Common Equity, will be up in the meeting rooms up on the levels 1 and 2. 2 and 3 is this way, and 4 and 5 is that way. Yes. We've got a photographer, and if you don't want to have photos taken, please go and get a red dot for your badge from the front desk, and then we'll delete those photos if any are taken of you. To ask questions, we're going to have the speakers now, but then some discussion. To ask questions, you need to come to the 2 microphones here, because otherwise the people online won't hear you. These sessions in the morning are being recorded as well, so you should know that. And I think that's probably it. My next job is to just welcome to the stage Andrew Ferguson. He's the Managing Director of Coverforce Insurance Broking. The Federation's developed a great relationship with Coverforce, and a number of our member co-ops are now insured through Coverforce. They offer us great deals and very competitive prices. Andrew, while they're not a cooperative, Andrew certainly epitomises the cooperative principles. Not only does he run the business, but he's also very active in his local community and a local councillor as well. So that balancing of our business and social purpose, I think he demonstrates. And I'll just ask Andrew to come to the stage to say a few words.
Well, thanks very much, Sam, and I've managed to turn off my mobile phone, so I learnt the lesson very, very early this morning. Thanks very much, Sam, for the very generous introduction. I just want to say I also want to take the opportunity to acknowledge we're on Aboriginal land and pay my respects to the elders past and present. And I know the Teachers Federation have got a very long history of involvement in Indigenous issues, as has many people here. But we also know much more work needs to be done about jobs and social justice. Coverforce are long-term sponsors. We sponsor many peak organisations because we're interested in the collective organisation of people to have a stronger voice by bringing people together and being strong advocates for change. And that's in that space we sponsor the Developers Association in New South Wales, the civil contractors and many others, but we've got a special interest in cooperatives. We do much work in this space for community organisations, and we know business is not just about transactions, it's about values and partnerships, so we're very pleased to be a sponsor here. I'm not sure if Sam forgot to invoice us last year when we didn't come to the conference, but I hope I'm not reminding him just in case he didn't. But we are interested in being here. I also want to acknowledge there are a number of other sponsors. I know one is Common Equity, and we're pleased they became a Coverforce insurance broking client last year. And we do insurance for both large and small cooperatives. And I think I spoke to First Food this morning, and I've got a commitment from Mildura for an opportunity to quote. I think Sam, I don't know if he likes Alan Jones or not, but I know there's a bit of a sales pitch here, and that's part of doing business with sponsors. So if there is an opportunity to assist your business, it won't be just about premium for ourselves. It'll be about doing a risk assessment on your business, looking for the right insurance, being competitive, and we know price is always important, but quality and value add and partnership are all very important to good business. I do want to wish you all a success and a good conference. I know people have come from all parts of New South Wales and also from interstate, and I know you'll share your ideas in a very generous way to help build a great movement for cooperatives. So thanks very much, Sam, and I wish your conference every success.
Thanks, Andrew. Great, let's get into it. We've got, unfortunately, Ronnie was going to be here in person, but she's stuck at home with a croak. I'm sure she'll tell you about it and you'll be able to hear it. So both our keynote speakers here this morning are now going to be online. Nathan's in the US. So I'll introduce Ronnie first, if you're there. There you are, Ronnie. Ronnie Carne-O, she's a social entrepreneur and the founder of food rescue charity Oz Harvest, which hopefully many of you know. She's a passionate advocate and activist, renowned in the food waste landscape. She's regularly on national media and an advisor to government and a sought-after speaker. Her mission is to fight food waste and feed hungry people, and she's an Order of Australia. She was also named Australian Local Hero of the Year. There's a feature film about her journey called Food Fighter, and she's just published a memoir, A Repurposed Life. So without further ado, I just welcome Ronnie to the screen and look forward to hearing what you can share with us this morning. Thanks, Ronnie.
Hello, Ronnie. Your mic is muted. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm talking away and you can't hear me. So first of all, it's a huge honor to be with all of you. And I too would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose land I meet all of you today and pay my deep respects to the custodians of this land, wherever you are in Sydney and around the country. I also would like it known that my pronoun is she, her. I must apologize for not being with you all in person. Yesterday, somebody said to me that my bark sounds somewhere between a Pekingese and a Doberman, and I didn't think it was fair to come spluttering all over you. So I chose to meet you all online. So thank you all so very much. I guess the very first thing I want to say before I share a little bit of my story is I want to check in with all of you. And of course, it's incredibly frustrating because I can't see you and you can see me. But I'm going to ask you all a question. I don't expect an answer, but it's more for you to think about. And my question is, how many of you woke up this morning with immense gratitude? Gratitude for the fact that you woke, that you have breath. Gratitude for the fact that I'm pretty sure each and every one of us this morning woke up in a bed and we could look up and see a roof above our heads and look out and see a window and perhaps see sun or whatever weather there was. I just ask you to keep that gratitude mindset because you're sitting in a conference that has been arranged for you. And I'm sure that you all feel immensely grateful that you are sitting there. But I think gratitude is one of the biggest things I've learned in the last 20 years since I started Oz Harvest. But I'll go back just a little and share a little bit of my story because there is a tie-in at some point in this whole notion of co-ops, of collaborative working together, which I think is really one of the most fundamental pieces of our society. And if we've learned anything post-COVID, I think it is how, and I heard this phrase this week and I just have fallen in love with it, how community is the new immunity. But let me just share with you that I started OzHarvest in a way. I'm completely an accidental activist. I hadn't spent my life committed to becoming the CEO and founder of a charity. I never grew up thinking that one day I'm going to give back. Absolutely not at all. I was born in South Africa, as many of you will hear from I sometimes say my speech impediments, so apologies to any South Africans in the room, but during the apartheid era. And there's absolutely no doubt that that particular form of discrimination and inequality fundamentally set values in place that I subliminally absorbed and didn't even know I was getting. I was very fortunate that my parents, who, although they were not brave and courageous and didn't fight the system, at home embedded in us that all people are equal and that nobody should be discriminated against because of the color of their skin. And so growing up in South Africa during this regime, which mandated discrimination, is quite difficult to even explain to people who've never experienced that. And whilst we certainly heard about challenges against our Indigenous people, this was mandated discrimination and left me to choose to leave South Africa when I finished school. And finishing school, I actually went from the one extreme to the other, from this land of inequality. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. This is the reason I'm not in the room with you. I just will have a quick sip. Apologies. Landed in Israel and spent the next 10 years on a kibbutz. And I'll share with you just a little story about the complete opposite mindset, perhaps, of having lived in South Africa to the mindset of living in a communal society where everybody was working according to their ability and getting according to their need. A group of South Africans came to visit the kibbutz I was on. And on the very first day, one of the guys turned around and said, where do I leave my boots to be polished? So that gives you an inkling into society in South Africa. And on the answer by the Israeli on our kibbutz said, oh, you just leave them outside your door and they will be cleaned. First day that happened, second day that happened, third day this guy left his boots were cleaned, fourth day they were cleaned. On the fifth day, there was a pile of the muddiest boots, dirtiest boots you could ever imagine, with a note on them saying, this is kibbutz, it is your turn today. So just sharing with you, living in a value-led society was extremely different from the way I'd been brought up. And it was fascinating and wonderful, but I didn't know then that I was very entrepreneurial, very independent, and that became a challenge to live in a place that said, you go and work here, you do this, you do what's right. Sorry. And so after some time, left kibbutz and went to live in the city. And then the fortunes within my family changed. And I say, we actually chose to come and live in the land of milk and honey. We immigrated to Australia. Now, that was just, again, an extraordinary stroke of luck and planning, because that is where I could start living a very different way of life. And I still had no intention of starting a charity, but I did start a business. I was quite, again, entrepreneurial, found work. I won't go into all those details, but I think what's really important is that the work I was doing was around producing beautiful events or conferences, much like the one you have today. And today, through the day, you will see that you are being fed. And today, I believe you will be given very special food, and you'll find out more about that. But at every one of my events, I made sure that there was plenty food, because food is about dignity, sharing, caring. And if many of you within this room are part of agricultural co-ops or obviously collaborative groups, you understand the value of food. And yet, what I now know is that in some way our food system is broken. But just go back a while, there I am producing all these events, and at every one of my events, the food that is left over, because I always made sure there was food left over, made sure that at the end of those events, you know, you start very early in the morning, you end very late, and that food was being thrown away until I actually landed up doing an event that there was so much food that it was actually unconscionable that that food would just get thrown away. And I loaded it up into my vehicle. I was not geared for delivering that food anywhere that night. I was dressed smartly, fancily in a little sports car, but loaded it up and took it to the only charity I knew, which at the time was the Matthew Talbot Hostel. And I dropped off that food, and a light bulb in a way went off, because it became very apparent that I didn't actually need to ever waste food again, and that good food should feed people who need it most. And I kind of became a rogue food rescuer for a while, until through a magnificent convergence of events, I chose to visit South Africa. I hadn't been back to South Africa since Mandela was in jail, and I visited a friend who took me to Soweto. And I don't know if any of you have heard of Soweto or been to Soweto, but it is a shanty town. It is a place where people, honestly, when I grew up in South Africa, I could never go there because it was so dangerous. And she took me there, and I was scared to drive in, because in my childhood mind, I was now an adult, but in my childhood mind, that scary place. But as we drove in, she said to me that she had been responsible for electricity in Soweto. And that is literally when a light bulb went off in my mind. And the hairs on my arm stood up, because I suddenly knew that I wanted to know what it felt like to make that kind of impact on that many people. And by the time we'd got to the place that we were going to visit in Soweto, I knew that I would come back to Australia. My life would never be the same again. And I was going to start a food rescue organization. And that really was the birth of Oz Harvest. And for the first 7 years, I worked full-time in my business while I built Oz Harvest. And so today, what many of you may or may not know about Oz Harvest, you see our bright yellow vehicles, and yep, yellow is a bit of a beloved color for us. It's our brand. It is bright, it is smiley, it is warm, it is happy, and signifies, I think, the warmth and generosity that the sun gives us. And you wonder, and I would like you to know that sometimes I wonder too, at the fact that as a little, starting off as a little charity, we now have a very recognized brand, and we have an enormous impact. Just to give you some little details around, for example, what we've done through COVID, because I think, and I'm just going to make sure I get it right, because it's quite extraordinary, is just some little facts. Through COVID, through the last year, from the 30th of March to the 31st of May, we have diverted 12,153,844 kilos of food from going to landfill. We've delivered 715,717 meals across all our programs. We've cooked, and this is a new program. So through COVID, what OzHarvest did was we pirouetted. We didn't pivot, we pirouetted. We redeployed all our staff into new roles because so many roles just fell by the way. We couldn't deliver them in the way that we had done previously through COVID. And one of the new programs we started was cooking meals in our kitchen, which were delivered to many of the people who used to visit charities that closed down through COVID, because many charities were manned by elderly people who were suddenly needing to protect their own health. And I need to share with you that some of those charities have never opened again, even though here in New South Wales and in Sydney, we are so fortunate and have not gone through the kind of experiences and lockdown that Victoria have gone through. And, you know, we are a national organization, but through that cooking program, we created 37 hospitality hero partnerships, we call them, with chefs who had lost their jobs, whose businesses had closed down, and we got them cooking for us. We delivered over 150,000 hampers that we created for casual workers, international students, and those people who weren't used to going to a charity and who look just like us and who suddenly fell between the cracks and suddenly found themselves needing food relief. So pre-COVID in Australia, which is such a devastating fact, 5 million people through the year need food relief of some sort. Post-COVID, an extra million have been added. So we can talk about all the economics in the world. Our treasurer and our prime minister can tell us that jobs are back and the economy is back. I can tell you that food relief and food rescue will be needed for a very long time. But I guess the intention of OzHarvest is all about its impact. It's all about, you know, I intended OzHarvest to exist until there was no waste, not understanding that a third of all food goes to waste that is produced globally, not understanding that in Australia it's costing us between $20 and $30 billion a year. So our intention now is about making the biggest impact, making sure that we educate around not wasting food, and that we educate and teach vulnerable people how to be upskilled through some of our education programs. And we continue to work with businesses, with the supermarkets, with industry to, again, recalibrate and understand the value of food. And I know that that will be such a valid and important message for many of you in the cooperative world who deal with food to understand. From our points of view, we want to make sure that from farm to table, no food is left unused, that food does not have to get churned back into the earth because it's being rejected. And so we're trying to work really closely with farmers, manufacturers, producers, everyone in the food supply chain. I think that the most important thing for me post-COVID is that none of us forget what we've been through, and none of us try and create a pre-COVID world. COVID has brought so many of us to rethink who we are, how we want to live, what kind of a society we want to live in. And just hearing about the co-op that started last night with 5 new bicycle riders absolutely inspires and excites me, because this whole notion of collaboration, of working together, of finding new ways, new systems to deal with old problems is really what each and every one of us has to do. and perhaps I think I've spoken too much, but I want to just end with a little story that I think may or may not resonate with all of you. It is the afterword in my book. Well, I guess if we're plugging things, Coverforce did. There's my book. If anyone wants to read it, please go ahead. It's available everywhere. But the afterword in the book is what I want to share with you. And it's the story, it's a quote that I heard that I put in the book because I think it's so relevant. And it goes like this. We as human beings, in the event of a huge conflagration, like a fire, have three principal options as to how we would behave. Number one, we can look at that fire and run away as fast as we can and leave those that cannot run to burn. Number two, we can write an angry letter to the newspaper demanding that those responsible be punished. Or we can start a demonstration. And number three, we can run and find a bucket. And if you cannot find a bucket, find a jug. And if you cannot find a jug, find a teaspoon. And I know that a teaspoon is tiny and that fire is huge, but there are millions of us. And if every single one of us uses our teaspoon, we can put out that fire. And so I would like to create the order of the teaspoon, where each and every one of us wear our teaspoon on our lapel, or as I do around my neck or on my ring, to remind ourselves of how we all have a teaspoon and each and every one of us can use that teaspoon every day. So I cannot see any of you, but would you all please do this? And I have to assume that you are listening to me. So if you all do this, can you please look down into your hands? In your hand is your metaphorical teaspoon. Can you please take that teaspoon? Can you put it in your heart? And can you make sure to use it every single day in whatever way, as long as it makes a difference, a positive difference to one person or to more. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to start off your conference and to give you some food for thought around impact, collaboration, culture. Culture is just so important. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ronnie. That was fantastic. We'll have some time at the end for some questions and discussion. So Ronnie will stay with us and listen to the next speaker. But I think she again reflects the cooperative principles, that message of gratitude, that journey that she's taken, the problem that she's solving, and the message of action in the end. We're here about thought leadership today, but we're also here about action, and that's what co-ops are about. We're about enterprise. Fantastic. Great. Our next speaker is Nathan Schneider. Nathan's online there in the US. He's a journalist and author who covers social movements in the United States. Since 2015, he's been a professor of media studies at the University of Colorado Boulder. He's been a leading advocate for platform cooperativism to address issues of disruption and growing issues related to the gig economy and the new economy. In 2015, together with the New School professor Trevor Schultz in New York, they organised a two-day conference billed as a coming out party for the cooperative internet. This led to the publication of the book and the coining of this phrase, platform cooperativism. And the book's title is great. Ours to Hack and to Own, The Rise of Platform Cooperativism, a New Vision for the Future of Work and a Fairer Internet. Nathan, thanks very much for joining us today. And please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be there, even virtually. I'm sorry I can't be there more fully. I had the chance to be in Australia a few years ago, and I hope I'll be able to come back again. I'm speaking from Boulder, Colorado, which is the historical and current and unceded lands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Ute, and other communities. And I use he, him pronouns. I'm really grateful for the chance to follow Ronnie's talk. She's introduced so much about collaboration and organic problem solving. And I'm gonna offer a little bit about how I think the cooperative movement can learn from some of those experiences and those lessons. Can you make me a co-host so I can share screen? Or whatever it takes. Okay, thank you. All right, so what I'd like to share is just a bit of reflection on where we've come and what we're up against and what we're facing today. Very much in that spirit of recognizing that the cooperative movement is not something of the past alone, but is a legacy and a possibility. And it's a possibility our world really deeply needs. When you look at the stories, and I've become a real junkie for these stories of early cooperative movements, over and over, you see these incredible cases of collaboration as a competitive advantage. So, here we see a picture on the stamp of Alphonse Desjardins, who is somebody, a name most people, I suspect in the United States, for instance, where I live, don't know. And yet his influence is incredibly profound. He was Quebecois, in Quebec, essentially founded the credit union movement in North America. It was a journalist, somebody who was attentive to the working class community in which he lived, and devoted his life to building this model that would enable financial inclusion, as it's now called, for people who didn't have access, who were unseeable by the financial system of the time. And the solution to this problem of lack of access to financing was what he saw all around, the relationships among the people in a neighborhood. In his context, in his mind, the parish, he was Catholic and many of the people around him were too. And the parish was a kind of vital current. It was a resource. It was a network of relationships through which people knew each other and trusted each other and negotiated all kinds of dealings. And he saw that this kind of networked relationship could also facilitate responsible financial dealings. That the relationships among the people in the community could be a means of determining who one might lend money to or not. Now we call this, people in lending world, in the financial world, call this character-based lending, right? Everything is a buzzword now. But in his time, it was just the organic life of the parish that he and others were recognizing as a means of doing what the bankers in in the center of town didn't know how to do. The bankers didn't know the difference between a trustworthy and a non-trustworthy worker in a factory or textile mill, whatever it was, right? They couldn't tell, but the people in those communities knew. And therefore they were able to do something for themselves, which the people in the financial institutions couldn't do. This is a pattern we see repeated over and over in our history of cooperatives. The power of mutual relationships, of relationships among members, people who are able to see opportunities, see tragedies like what Ronnie described in that food waste, see something wrong, and recognize, hey, we can fix this. The solution is right in front of our face. It might not be right in front of your face if you're way up in that office tower, but from where we are, we can see it. This is something we've seen in the agricultural sector, right? Where farmers understood what they needed, a century ago, for instance, as the railroad barons and the oil monopolies and so forth. These companies that had so much power over them, the big banks, couldn't understand. And through the understanding of the ordinary farmer, the agricultural cooperative movement became so powerful. It became powerful not just because it enabled a means of people getting a better deal on certain things, but it actually enabled people to participate in shaping the worlds in which they lived. The 19th century populists here in the US, for instance, they elected the governor of Colorado, where I live, in 1892. This was a movement with a lot of power. They're very different from how we tend to talk about populism today. They were explicit in their determination to use cooperatives as a means of preventing demagogues from having appeal to poor and desperate people. Through cooperatives, poor farmers could discover their own power, their power with each other. And the region that I'm in, and this is part of a history of colonization, but it's also a history of cooperation. We have all around us grange halls, buildings where farmers would congregate and meet and discuss the things that they needed to build for themselves. And the vision that the organizers of this movement had was that through this kind of collaboration, people would see their own power. This is a competitive advantage that I have come to feel we have largely lost in our cooperative movement, particularly among cooperatives that are at least a couple generations old. I've been in rooms full of compassionate co-op leaders, leaders of the credit unions that are descended from the entrepreneurship of Alphonse Desjardins, his family, and his supporters. These are people today who care deeply about their members and want to serve their members. But they tend to frame that feeling, to express that feeling in the context of what can I do? What can my company do for individual member X? What can I do for individual member Y? How can I replicate that service to member A, B, C, D, E, right? It's about what can the company do for the member. We've embraced a kind of customer relationship with our members so often. And what we're not seeing is the capacity of our members to find solutions among themselves, the capacity, the power of those relationships among members, that might be our superpower. In some countries, of course, it's important to recognize that lateral kind of cooperation never happened. There are many contexts in which cooperatives were imposed as a part of the story of colonization. And they were not emerging from a kind of emergent relational process. And that still presents an opportunity. They still have a cooperative structure. They're still part of the global cooperative movement. And in many respects, countries that came by their cooperatives through colonization and those who have gone through generations of kind of neglect of the relationships among members, those lateral relationships, are in a similar spot. And we have to work together as a global movement, I think, to recognize what can be really our power. And this process has been driven by forces beyond just the cooperative movement itself, by regulation, by business culture, kind of managerialism, and an overabundance of caution that can sometimes creep in. And in some ways is natural to the cooperative movement itself. But it's important that we recognize how we are different. Here in the United States, for instance, the Cold War period was a time when a lot of cooperatives kind of neglected and even distanced themselves from their cooperative culture. You know, my grandfather was, it turns out, a CEO of an agricultural cooperative. But I never knew that growing up. I didn't realize that until I was writing a book about cooperatives and came across the bylaws of his company and realized, oh my gosh, that's what it was. It was not how he presented himself. It wasn't a part of our family's self-understanding. We just knew that he was running a huge company, but wasn't rich somehow. And was just kind of making a regular salary. But nevertheless, there, you know, I know that, you know, that movement was still a part of what he was doing, except it was suppressed. It wasn't a story that was being told. Many of our cooperatives removed co-op from their branding. They just acted like good old American capitalism. And in the process, of course, you lose that competitive advantage. So why do we need to go back? For one thing, we are in a moment where the rest of the economy is already doing the lateral stuff and discovering the power of what cooperatives have been doing for a long time. The whole idea of online platforms is built on the power of what people can accomplish through relationships with each other. This is the stuff powering now some of the biggest companies in the world. Facebook is the great kind of news and information distributor of on the planet that isn't producing any news. It circulates what people share with each other. It enables the groups that people form with each other. A lot of the ride sharing and delivery platforms that many of us are very critical of, right, nevertheless gain their power by being connective surfaces and managing and controlling the connections that happen between people, but nevertheless trying to leverage the power of what happens when people want to do things for each other. You know, platforms like eBay, Amazon, all these sorts of things, they leverage the capacity of people to learn from each other. Amazon doesn't review books, it relies on its users' reviews of books and all the other stuff that they sell. These kinds of relationships don't have to be controlled by monopolies. In fact, they shouldn't be. And it should be even more powerful for these kinds of relationships to happen on the terms of the people participating in them. How can co-ops reclaim that capacity, that superpower? I think that if we did this kind of platform relationship building on co-op terms, under co-op ownership and governance, it would be even more powerful than what the big companies can enable. What we're seeing even is that some of the biggest companies in the platform economy are recognizing that they need to incorporate their users more directly into the heart of the company, to the point where, for instance, Uber and Airbnb and other companies have asked the US Securities and Exchange Commission, can we please share ownership in our companies with some of our most loyal users? And actually, we don't have a legal framework to enable that in the ways that they'd like to do it. But it's striking that they recognize that this is something that would actually be of benefit to them. And this is something that we are built to do from the bottom up. I think a way of beginning is to think about how can you start to unlock those possibilities among your members? How can you enable members to find each other and start to solve problems for one another? An example of this is a purchasing co-op here in my town that I've recently done a case study on and its broader network. It's called Amicus Solar. It's a really lean but powerful purchasing cooperative for small solar panel companies, solar installers. So these are companies around the country. It was founded by a worker co-op called Namaste Solar, but it's a purchasing co-op of small businesses. And I was pretty blown away to learn about the kind of purchasing power that this cooperative has, and was interviewing the CEO about what they do. And one of the things that he said really surprised me, which is that actually more important than our purchasing is the conversation that happens among our members on an online platform that they've set up. And there on a daily basis, employees at solar companies around the country, increasingly across North America, are talking to each other about the things they're wrestling with and solving their own problems with each other, rather than just going to the co-op one-to-one and asking the co-op to solve problems for them. They're not necessarily doing this even at board meetings or at the general meetings, right? But they're creating spaces where on a daily basis, members of the cooperative are able to find those kind of unpredictable synergies and work out their challenges together. There are tools now starting to emerge, like for instance, kind of in your neck of the globe, Lumio, developed by a worker co-op in New Zealand, a platform that is designed for online conversation, much like a social network like Facebook, except it has decision-making tools built in. So it encourages groups to come together, make decisions, do things, come to conclusions, not just have endless debates like we often see in social media. Lumio is something that I use in several co-ops that I'm a member of, several new co-ops that are encouraging member participation at all sorts of levels. What are some other ideas that we can learn from? What if, for instance, credit unions, cooperative financial institutions of all sorts could explore creating small lending circles among members? You know, for instance, I remember once having a conversation with an employee at a large and successful Canadian credit union, and she was from Kenya, and she was describing how her experience, you know, contrasting in some ways her working with the credit union with the fact that she's in a group of women also from Kenya who lend money to each other. Very common traditional lending circle. Yet these things were totally separate. Why is it that they need to be so? What if those modern credit unions could bring that energy of grassroots collaboration into the financial tools that they offer to their members? Why does that long traditional legacy of lending circles, how has it become so separate from how we practice economic cooperation? How can we facilitate participatory budgeting? We have cities all over the world now using participatory budgeting to allocate certain percentages of their budgets so that community members can bring up project ideas that might not surface in among the representatives. And these have been really powerful, a tradition that emerged out of Brazil and has spread all over the place, including across the United States and many parts of the world. How can we do that in our cooperatives? Can we set aside some resources that are separate from the normal processes of board and managerial control that put members in charge, give members a chance to collaborate on decision making? And, you know, most simply of all, are we creating spaces where members can talk, can meet each other, can learn from each other? You know, I hate to admit how much of my family's financial literacy has come from just threads on Reddit and other social media platforms where people are just sharing advice to each other. Can we help create those spaces where it's not just random people on the internet you're talking to, but co-owners of a financial institution or any kind of institution where we all have a stake together and we're all members and co-owners together? Once again, just as those big platform companies are recognizing, it's hard to do this kind of collaboration right without co-ownership that goes all the way down. You know, and in work I've been doing around this idea of exit to community, I've been working with startups of all sorts that are recognizing that community ownership is an incredibly powerful way to supercharge their the communities of their users, and that without community ownership, they're kind of at odds with themselves. The demands of investors are at odds with the community that the platforms really need in order to thrive. We have the opportunity in the cooperative movement to do those things together, to do community collaboration, to do that kind of organic, generative work of enabling the communities to solve their own problems, while also making community ownership and governance the core value, the core at putting community ownership and governance at the heart of the organizations and the platforms that all this is happening on. How can we begin to trust our members again, to trust the power that they have and the power that they can discover with each other? How can we begin to think of ourselves less as managers and directors and more as facilitators? I don't know, but I pose that question to you, and I'm really curious to hear how you might answer it. Thank you so much for hearing me out today in your time. And I hope that before too long, I can be there in person again. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nathan. What can the co-op do for its members was one of the questions you posed. I also enjoyed to hear, well, certainly co-ops did go quiet a bit across the decades, but hopefully now and hopefully today, that's my message, that we're out and proud. And that idea that networking and community is equally or more important in a cooperative to the other services it provides members is a very common thread in the cooperatives that I work with. Thank you to you both. We've got some time, as I said, for some questions or comments for the speakers. I haven't prepared or, compelled anyone to kick us off, but questions, ideas? Yep, just have to go up to the mic first.
Hello, test, yep. Yes, I'm John Cheel here from Narara Eco Village. Got a couple of questions, one for Ronnie. What do you do with the food that goes to waste that you can't salvage? And for Nathan, I've got two questions. Have you heard about Slack? In Narara Eco Village, we have Slack with all our channels. So we have channels for, dogs and all sorts of channels where people can collaborate. And the other thing is in Sociocracy, we try to distribute governance even down to lower levels. So, yeah, just wondering if you heard about those two.
Do you want to go first, Ronnie?
Sure, thank you. So every bit of food we collect gets delivered out to over 1,600 charitable organizations. We don't give food to an organization that hasn't used it up. First of all, our food is all collected with safe food handling. The businesses, some of the businesses we service, of course, have food waste. And we're now doing waste audits. We're working closely with food businesses to make sure that food first goes to feed hungry people in the hierarchy of food waste. And then, of course, to either compost worm farms before it goes to feed animals. It should first feed hungry people. We ourselves generate very little food waste. We have kitchens, we create pickles, we do all the stuff that our grandmothers did. But our whole Fight Food Waste campaign is about teaching households, because that's the low-hanging fruit, and that's where so much food is wasted, how not to waste food. And we've got world first research that will be coming out. We work with universities and behavior works, human resources experts on how to shift and change behavior, because our grandparents knew how not to waste food, but our children seem not to. And so that will be coming out on World Environment Day on the 29th of September.
Great,
So I
thank
don't
you.
know if that answers, but very much awareness around teaching people how not to waste food in the first place. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you're going to be eating beautiful food today that is courtesy of Oz Harvest, and we make sure that within that there's rescued food. So it's food that's perfectly fit for consumption, and it's gourmet and beautiful.
Thank you.
That's right. I should have already said the whole conference is being catered by Oz Harvest. So thank you very much. And Nathan, hopefully you've remembered the questions about sociocracy and about Slack.
Yeah, I wrote them down. I love what Ronnie said there, that we're just remembering what our grandmothers did. I aspire to that very much. Yeah, absolutely. So, Slack is an example, again, of one of these rediscoveries where the mainstream world, the kind of corporate world, is discovering things that people have been doing for a long time. And they're surfacing them in a platform that in many cases is built, with, again, managerial control and corporate surveillance in mind, unfortunately. But that kind of tool that enables that chatter to happen in digital space is, precisely the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And over, we're seeing these big companies adopting practices that we in the cooperative world have often neglected. It's great to hear that you're using them. And I hope that someday you'll be using a cooperative Slack or running your own, and that we find ways to build some of our practices and culture into those tools. That's something that my lab does, for instance. We run all of our own software using open source tools and self-hosting. So we run a platform called Matrix for the purposes that a lot of people use Slack for, which is a software that we're able to control that has some different approaches than how Slack works, and has been really fun to play with. Sociocracy is absolutely, these are examples of the kinds of things that a lot of new cooperatives are doing today. So I hear a lot. This is probably the 5th time today I've heard about sociocracy, because I'm constantly in conversation with people who are developing new kinds of cooperatives and that are really attentive to how can we really express our values and how we govern day to day. And one of the things I'm really passionate about is building more dialogue between some of the experiments that are happening among newer cooperatives, like embracing this kind of distributed power structure of sociocracy, with some of the power and strength and legacy of older cooperatives that haven't integrated some of these new learnings and experiments. So thanks for sharing a bit about what you do in your co-op.
Thanks, John. Peter?
Is it on?
Yes.
Great. I'm Peter Tregelgas. I'm a board member of the Cooperative Federation. And thanks so much for both of your presentations. I've got a question that's relevant to both of you, and you just may respond, in that you talked both in the sense of sort of fear and persecution in the context, one of the South African apartheid scenario, and that extraordinary story, Nathan, about your grandfather and if that light his concerns during the Cold War, which meant that many cooperatives started to look inside of themselves rather than externally in terms of the broader, bigger media picture. Now, in that sense, Ronnie, you've been incredibly successful in a broad, big media context. I'd like to hear about how you've engaged in that media in order that you've taken an alternative concept and made it into the sort of mainstream. And in the same context, Nathan, about how co-ops can own media, how we can become the controller.
You look ready, Ronnie. Go for it.
No worries. So I guess there's a very simple little answer, but I will elaborate on it. Our impact drives everything from our income to the kind of attraction that Oz Harvest has had. Look, I took a really simple concept: make sure that good food doesn't go to waste, and rather let's feed people. Not even knowing at the time around the environmental impact of saving good food from going to landfill. And it was so sensible that people just love the concept because we'd forgotten about simple, basic concepts. And you probably won't believe me, but we have actually never invited media in. But media are just attracted to the energy and that positive intention of the storytelling. Storytelling is such an important part of what media loves. So within just even listening to Nathan, just listening to this whole story around the value of co-ops, you are all sitting there with magnificent organizations that I, for one, knew nothing about. So you can tell why I'm not with you in person. The stories of what have always just garnered us the kind of media and the kind of attraction like bees to honey. And we're good at storytelling, narrative. That's what's come out also of COVID. We need to tell stories. We need to connect each other. And in a way, co-ops have beautiful stories to tell. So I think, yes, we do our work well. We're efficient. We've created this beautiful logistics model. We've created a culture that I get stopped on the street and people stop me and say, I want to work for you. I want to come and work in Oz Harvest. And that is magnificent, but it's really because we've never wavered from our intention, which is to serve people, to make the biggest impact, to teach and to learn. And I think that is what becomes very attractive. There's nothing, there's no overt. I say, you know, we're a for-purpose organization. And it's not that I'd never call us a not-for-profit. Our profit is just measured in a different way. And so I won't call us a not-for-profit. We are a profit-making. It's just measured differently. So I think when you can tell those stories well, people want more of those stories. The good stories multiply out.
Okay, and Nathan.
Yeah, I really agree with that focus on the organic. And I often actually get anxious when the story spreads before the capacity. So for instance, in the last week or so, the New York Times had a big feature on a new kind of Uber alternative in New York, which is part of an accelerator that I'm on the board of called Start Co-op. And everybody, you know, a lot of the people around me were excited, you know, wow, this is a big breakout moment. I've seen it happen a few times. I've, you know, seen, you know, some of the co-ops I work with featured in that way over the years. And I get scared because I worry that because we don't have the kind of institutional capacity that among our new co-ops that we really need, because we don't have the financing capacity to scale to meet demand, I worry when the story gets ahead of what we built. And I know that when we build, the stories will get told about us because we have a great story. There's no question about that. So I worry less about how can we get our story out there everywhere, and more about how can we make sure that we are building powerful movement. And I'm really worried, at least in my context, that we're not doing enough to build the power of the next generation that has incredible stories built in to the things that people are doing. But when that big article comes out, when that big, you know, TV special happens, are we ready to step up? That's what I worry more about. And that's why, you know, for instance, at Start.coop, we're really working to try to bring some of the power of the broader cooperative legacy to bear in supporting these new models that people are getting really excited about. The second way of owning the media, as you put it, Peter, is that we're seeing a growing interest in cooperative ownership of newspapers and other media platforms. We have a network forming, actually started by a grad student in California. You can find it at newscoop.wiki. We're having weekly meetings, or monthly meetings, where people are presenting. People in the journalism world are presenting experiments around shared ownership in media. Here in Colorado, a journalist-owned paper or journalist-owned online news source called the Colorado Sun just bought 24 local newspapers, and so it's exciting to see a renewal of the co-op model in that industry, and I think it's just going to spread.
And I just say something because I understand and recognize fear, but you probably can tell that I don't allow fear to rule me. And in a way, the story drove the ability drove the story. So we never had a story told about us that we couldn't fulfill, but it then allowed us to think bigger and think larger and roll out new programs, which then get shared. So I think I just wanted to balance that for those, because it's sometimes easier to be fearful than it is to be brave and courageous. So I just felt I needed to just balance that.
Absolutely. And actually that particular case, our community rallied in a big way, and we were able to use it to build capacity and to do stuff that wasn't happening before. So, yeah.
Okay, we've got a few more minutes. Jeff?
I'll be quick. Thank you. My name's Jeff Bugden. I'm I was the chairman of the Pecan Farmers Cooperative of Australia. We started our farming cooperative out of necessity, really. We were being really ruined by a multinational company in Australia as farmers, and we decided that we'd all get together and start a cooperative. We thought we'd get 5 or 6 members and ended up with about 20 odd members in our first year, all pecan nut farmers. And being a cooperative is great. We're all cooperative minded, and what we want to do is grow fantastic pecan nuts and sell them to the Australian public. And we can do that, and we know how to do that. And I'm not a money person, and that's why I stepped down as the chairman of the cooperative. And in our first year, we had turned over $2 million, but that's gross, and that's what you turn over doesn't mean anything really. It's when it comes to it. But the fact is this, that we have to pay our farmers quite a long time before we actually sell the pecan nuts that they produce. And so we have a cash flow problem, and the banks will not look at us. So as all the good things about cooperatives that there is, the problem is that we have is cash flow. And so my question to both Nathan, Ronnie, and anyone else at the conference is, how do we get over this problem, this money problem? It's a real problem. Farmers need money to live. We need to pay them, you know what I mean? Yeah, we can sell the product, but it takes a year to sell the product, but they need to be paid a lot quicker than that. That's my question. Thank you.
Who'd like to respond? It's a tough one and a big one.
It is maybe because it's so directly co-op. I'll very briefly share that, Harvest started with my personal money, and then we got our first 50,000, and then our first year was 600,000, and now we're a $25 million a year organization, completely philanthropically funded. So the money is there. The money is there. It is about finding it. It is about, it's really hard on a business sense to understand you've got that year's lag, and it's selling a dream, selling the possibility of what's going to be sold. And I understand the challenges because you have a drought or you have bad weather, that's going to affect it. But maybe I sell dreams every day, but but maybe Nathan has a more concrete answer because he's dealing with this all the time.
Nathan?
Well, I think these are the kinds of problems we need to solve together. You know, when I talked about that that bank down the road from me, CoBank, $130 billion cooperative bank, that's a result of a legacy of a century of farmers with precisely this problem, building cooperative solutions that address it. The problem with that bank is that it was just for farmers according to the needs as they understood them 100 years ago. And so the new tech co-ops I work with have similar problems, but not similar enough that that bank can help them at all. What I think we need to start thinking about is think across the cooperative movement and recognize what are the shared needs that we all have. And financing is really at the heart of that. What's happened in the United States, at least, is that policy for cooperatives is very specific to particular industries and particular use cases. It's not like that for investor-owned businesses. You know, venture capital doesn't care what industry you're in. Why do they put straitjackets on cooperatives? We have a new, our senator here in Colorado has just introduced to the US Congress a bill called the Capital for Cooperatives Act. This is the first time that I know of in US history that federal law around cooperatives has actually been designed to apply to all kinds of cooperatives, to actually unleash the cooperative model on the economy rather than specifying it, boxing it into particular industries. And so I think it's so important that we don't just focus on the particular places where we've gotten a little beachhead, a little toehold in the economy, but we need to be thinking about the horizon. What policy structures do we need so that cooperative solutions can work across the economy, and that the solutions to problems like this become available, become opportunities for our creativity rather than being trapped. The reason that the banks aren't serving these needs is that the structures, the tight regulatory structures in which these banks operate are designed against us. This is the case all over the world in all kinds of different ways. We need to map out those bottlenecks and design comprehensive, broad solutions that enable us to be creative, not simply just to fit into a box. So your problem, I think, that you just described is the beginning of a conversation about solutions, about the future of the cooperative movement that we need to all be having together. So thank you for raising that bottleneck. I always try to take notes on every bottleneck I hear an entrepreneur talk about. What are the problems? And then I don't say, let's design solutions around those particular bottlenecks. I say, how can we design solutions that address all of them together? That also address problems that we don't even know about. One of the things that farmers did here in the state of Colorado that I'm so grateful for is they developed the most flexible, dynamic statute for incorporating cooperatives in the country. And as a result of that, Colorado has become the place where some of the most innovative tech co-ops are incorporating. Those farmers never would have thought that the statute that they set up would be used for the first blockchain cooperatives in the world, right? But because they created an open-ended framework, because they didn't limit what they were doing to their particular use case, because they invited creativity into the structure that they created, they enabled something for future generations. And that's, I think, how we have to think about it. How can we not only solve the problem that you just described, but how can we solve it in a way that will invite the creativity of those who follow after us?
Okay, we've only got time for one more question.
Thanks.
Very quick, Frank.
Okay. Frank Webb, Blue Tongue. We set up co-ops, but the challenge that we're having is one of finance, and you touched on it. It's very, very difficult to actually get a group of people together and then tap in on finance. And I find it really disgraceful, actually, that we're perhaps one of the wealthiest generations that's ever been on this earth. and we're all sitting around with bucket loads of money and bucket loads of assets, and all of these businesses that are being, these people have grown, are going to just die in many cases. What happens to those businesses when they decide to pull the plug and walk away from them? And what's going to happen to all those employees? And what's going to happen to all those assets? And this is a real challenge, I think, that we face in Australia, because we haven't got, you were talking about your changes in Colorado in the law for setting up co-ops. Our law here for setting up co-ops is really restrictive. You have to jump through so many hoops just to get to the stage where they'll let you be a co-op. And it's just insane. And we've only been able to set up workers' cooperatives in the last few years. So we need some real changes. So what about your comments there about intergenerational change and cooperatives?
I'm gonna take it as a comment, Frank. I think, and it was a good one. I think we need to finish here. We're well over time. Can I just ask you first to thank our speakers again for their contributions today? Look, thank you very much, Ronnie and Nathan. That's been fantastic for us. I know it's terrible or difficult on Zoom when you can't see us, can't feel the room, but thank you again. We're back in here at 11 for the next session, except Common Equity members are up in rooms 2 and 3, which is up on the first floor, up in that direction. Morning tea is available outside on the ground floor. Thanks, everyone.
invitation to ask some questions.
Still here? Take it to another level. I think we can start.
Richard, how are you? You're right in Australia.
Okay, welcome back. It's our second session, and we have some wonderful guests who've joined us today, as well as Lorraine, who'll be up online. This session's about farming, food, rural and regional cooperation, and as one of our key sectors, still one of the biggest sectors in New South Wales and across Australia for cooperative activity, certainly in the agricultural space. And issues of climate, issues of soil, regenerative farming are all things that float through our cooperative sector and through our agricultural cooperative sector. Recent times I've spent days in the sugarcane cooperative industry, an amazing cooperative sector up in northern New South Wales, sharing harvesting machines, running them and partly owning their mill, owning the refinery, and just a very strong sort of cooperative sector that I've been dealing with in recent times and working with. But so I'm really looking forward to this session, and we'll get straight into it. Each of our guests will speak for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have time again for discussion and questions. And Peter is the first up. He's the CEO of New South Wales Farmers, so we're very appreciative to have him here today. Certainly, the word around the New South Wales Parliament is that they are the supreme lobby group in the New South Wales politics, and I've already praised Peter for that. But it's a really strong organisation, and is one of the largest and most diverse farm organisations in Australia, representing primary producers ranging from oyster farmers on the coast to goat producers out in the far west. Peter manages the organisation, working closely with his farmer members, and has had a background in sustainable agriculture and working in global organisations in the farming space. Thank him very much again for joining us today, and give him the floor. Thanks, Peter.
Well, thank you, Sam, for that very kind introduction. A few acknowledgements. Richard O'Leary, Chairman of the Co-ops Federation. I'm also fortunate to have Richard as one of our executive councillors, and got the chance to spend a few days on the beautiful mid-north coast earlier in the year, actually, looking at some of the flood impacts up there. So, Richard, lovely to catch up. Mick Veitch, the Honourable Mick Veitch, back as Shadow Minister for Primary Industries. So fabulous to have Mick back, and Mick will be sharing some wisdom with us in the session ahead. And to the rest of the directors of the Co-op Federation. Well done on pulling together an event in what are very challenging times in the face of COVID. So it's great to be here today. So the title of my presentation today is Towards 30 by 30, a cooperative path to growth. And New South Wales Farmers has established this vision of achieving $30 billion of value in our primary industry sectors by 2030. So I'll start to unpack that a little bit in my remarks today, and importantly, I guess, touch on where I see the cooperative model really playing a key role in striving for what is a very ambitious goal for our sector in the decade ahead. So just to help you get your eye in terms of agriculture in New South Wales, and a little bit like the cooperative sector, agriculture is one of our first industries here in New South Wales. So we've been around for a long time as well, and this notion of modern relevance is really critical to keep reinforcing. So New South Wales agriculture delivers about 1 in every $10 of New South Wales's exports. About 75,000 direct jobs, about 85,000 jobs tied directly to value adding from agricultural produce in New South Wales. And currently we're about 25% of Australia's gross value of agricultural production. So National Farmers Federation, that New South Wales Farmers is proud to be a member of, have set the audacious goal of how do we grow our national agriculture to 100 billion by 2030. We're saying we'd like to take 30 of that. So we're wanting to step up in terms of what we're achieving here in New South Wales, and hopefully today I'll share some of the reasons to believe that this is indeed achievable. So the graph there just reflects our gross value of production over the last 7 years or so, and the best we achieved was in 16-17, which was about $15.5 billion. So to get to 30 billion obviously is a pretty immense stretch over the course of the next decade or so. I've had it on good advice that 2021 will be close to a record year for New South Wales agriculture. We saw the ABARE figures yesterday saying 66 billion of agricultural value nationally, which is a national record. So I guess the $500 million to $1.5 billion question is how much have the mice eaten out of that graph? Because that's really the clear and present challenge we're facing as we try and plant a winter crop, and the mice are still dancing through the fields. So look, it'll be a good year, but to achieve that 30 billion by 2030, we need to achieve around 11% year-on-year growth as a sector. And I guess a lot of you running co-ops and businesses, that's a pretty audacious goal. So let's unpack how we might start to approach that, and the role co-ops can play in that journey. So if we're going to strive for 30 billion by 2030, we need to sort of think about and look closely at different aspects of the farming cycle. So we talk about before the farm, in terms of better understanding the environment we're operating in, smarter procurement, better advice, better strategy. There's what we do on farm, so planning, production, monitoring, and then harvesting. How do we optimise those systems, and how do we get better at managing the risks farmers inherently face in farming? And then there's what we can do post-farm to, in essence, capture more value for the great produce we're known to produce here in New South Wales. So just touch on a few areas and some great examples of where co-ops are really stepping up to help us in these three areas. So before the farm comes down to better strategy, better advice, better procurement decisions. And we're very fortunate to have Peter in the room from Yenda Producers, a co-op that'll be 100 years old in a couple of years, and continues to do a fabulous job delivering member-driven advice and service and product inputs to farming members down in the south of the state. So this graph here sort of talks about the trends in farm productivity on New South Wales farms over the last 40 years. And there's a couple of interesting stories here. So productivity really comes down to how efficiently we're using inputs into farming and turning those into outputs from farming. So when I mention inputs, I'm talking land, I'm talking labour, I'm talking capital, services, and other inputs like fertiliser and chemicals and so on. And when I'm talking outputs, it's obviously the food and fibre we all enjoy. And that yellow line there is what's called total factor productivity, which is basically the ratio between those two things. So there's a couple of things to observe here. Look, New South Wales farmers have done an incredible job in terms of growing more from less over the last 40 years. If you look at the gap between the blue line at the bottom, which is inputs, and the red line in the middle of the graph, we do see a widening gap in the sense we're getting a lot more efficient in how we're using our inputs and generating considerably more both quantity and quality and value from the outputs from farming. And that's reflected in the yellow line, which is this total productivity measure. The other thing to mention, and I was just talking to Dave at morning tea, is the inherent volatility in agriculture in our state and indeed Australia, and I'll come back to this. Look, we were really well placed in 2017, that record year I mentioned, and it has just fallen off a cliff with severe drought, floods, fires, and now mice. So this volatility is a theme I'll return to around where co-ops might play a role going forward. But no, quality before the farm-focused co-ops, delivering member-driven advice, group buying power on inputs, sharing machinery. There's no doubt that that better, more efficient machinery will play a huge role in driving growth in farming in our state, and I think it's the University of Sydney's robot there. I think by 2030 there will be robots going around in the middle of the night, sorting weeds out, controlling disease, and so on. They're expensive bits of kit, so maybe back to Sam's point around that cooperative model to share equipment, I think certainly needs to be looked at as we go forward. The second element is this on-the-farm piece, and I just wanted to touch briefly on a piece of work that New South Wales Farmers has been involved in with the National Farmers Federation over the last 18 months or so. And these reports were released a couple of weeks back now under the term future-proofing farming. And I touched on the notion of the volatile nature of our sector here. Agriculture is the most volatile sector of the Australian economy, and the Australian agricultural sector is the most volatile agricultural sector out of all the G20 countries. So let that dawn on you. If there's risk in business, you find it in Australian agriculture, which is obviously a challenge, but something we're getting better at managing. So this was a really key piece of work that was funded by Adam Marshall and the New South Wales Government. And I would commend the reports to you. There's 6 really considered pieces of work across different aspects of this question of how we can support farmers to better manage risks. But I would like to drill down into report 3, which was done by University of Southern Queensland and Willis Towers Watson, a consulting agency there with experience in this insurance space. And I guess one thing New South Wales Farmers has been calling for a number of years now is some effective risk management tools for farmers to better deal with the variability in farm income. Something like a farm income protection insurance product. This would be a game changer for our sector and would give others the confidence to invest, would help deal with some of the cash flow issues we've heard about today. And so, yeah, report 3 really drilled into the role that co-ops and mutuals could play in delivering risk management products just like that could change the game for farming in our state. And that was the recommendation that finished in the synthesis report in the end. That the government should provide support for the formation of mutuals in the form of a contribution to initial capitalisation and or provision of liquidity support. So a number of commercial insurance companies have tried to step into this multi-peril space and have unfortunately walked away. There was a lot of enthusiasm after that 17 crop. The big players in the corporate insurance sector stepped in, and they had 2 years where they got their fingers burnt, big time. And now Lloyd's and Munich Re and the other reinsurers don't want to talk crop insurance in Australia. So could a cooperative or a cooperative mutual structure step where the commercial insurance providers can't go? And this report in essence says, yes, it potentially can. And there's a number of reasons for that, and I won't go into those details, but the stamp duty treatment of mutual products, fire services levies potentially not being being in scope for these types of products, that the discretionary payment option mutuals have that commercial insurers don't have. So we think there's a really interesting discussion to be had in this space. And if anyone's keen to have it this afternoon or at dinner tonight, I'd welcome the discussion, because this could really change the game as we strive towards 30 by 30. After the farm, I guess, is the final area I'll touch briefly on, guys. And we've already heard a few great examples of opportunities to capture more value for growers through shortening supply chains and ultimately capturing more value through sharing the great story of the product we produce. So this is an interesting graph that's 2016, so it's a few years old now, but it talks about the share of retail value that farmers capture across different agricultural produce types. It's interesting at a number of levels, but the thing that strikes me is the width of some of those orange bars there. So if we look at fruit and vegetables, say fruit, it could range from 40% to close to 70% of the value you see fruit on the shelves of Woolworths and Coles for. So if we can get better at taking farmers from the left-hand side of that graph to closer to the right-hand side of the graph, I mean, that could double profitability on farms, just through capturing more value, often through the stories we tell, the provenance of our product, or indeed through taking players out of that value chain and looking at different, more direct routes to ultimate consumers that a number of co-ops are successfully doing. So look, and think about that. It's a really interesting read, fresh agenda from 2016, but there's value to be had here, and New South Wales agriculture is all about quality. It's not about quantity, like Queensland, like WA. To find the value, this needs to be a quality play. So, I mean, a few great examples I'll touch on. Fortunately, someone wrote a fabulous article on where co-ops are at and the great future co-ops have in our Farmer magazine a few months back. So these were a couple that we've profiled in our Farmer piece. This is available online if anyone's interested. But yeah, some fabulous examples. So Torowina lamb, who I noticed on the menu tonight, is a great example from around Gilgandra, the Central West. Look frustrated at getting disappointing prices in terms of over-the-hook prices for first cross lambs. Deep belief in the quality of their product, the eating quality of their product. So formed a co-op, got the bargaining power and secured a much better outcome in terms of those first cross lambs, delivering value back to members. So a fabulous co-op, about 90 members now, still going really, really well out there from what I hear. The Casino Food Group is another co-op with a fabulous almost 100-year history. So this is let me get the acronym right. They've rebranded recently to the Casino Food Co-op, but it was the Northern Meat...
Northern Cooperative Meat.
Thank you, Sam. Northern Cooperative Meat Company, yes, based in Casino there. So I mean, these guys are doing a great job around the fabulous story of the produce from that Northern Rivers and northern part of the state. But I think the interest from New South Wales farmers is it's one of the one or two. I need to check this because Wingham could still be an option too. But it's one of two abattoirs in New South Wales where a farmer can go and have their own livestock processed and retain ownership of their livestock through the processing exercise and come out with retail packaged meat goods that they can then sell directly to consumers, into restaurants, into independent supermarkets. So we work with these guys on some stuff around potential direct exports to China. That work was 5 years ago. That's a harder sell in the current climate, but that notion that if you're growing fabulous beef and lamb, why not retain ownership of that fabulous beef and lamb a few further steps down the chain, brand it in a way that tells your story and capture that extra value. So a really great co-op story there. And then, Oz Group, I guess, would be familiar to many of us, and the blueberry industry has revolutionised that Coffs Harbour agricultural scene. Look, if you're sick of trying to sell your blueberries as a standalone farmer into the Coles and Woolworths, what do? You buy your disused Bunnings, you get 70 of your fellow growers involved, you invest in quality machinery, you diversify into export markets, you look at how we can use waste products, to Ronnie's points, through things like frozen blueberry products. Look, a fabulous story up there that are really ultimately, setting best practice around what this could look like if we think about co-ops at scale. So another great example of that after farm value capture that I've touched on. So look, final slide, guys, is where to next for co-ops, and I think New South Wales farmers, and I'm thinking in three particular spaces at the moment. Look, how do we take ag tech to scale? So the Australian Farm Institute a number of years back said that if we fully deploy agricultural technology and data and insights on Australian farms, that could be worth $20 billion alone towards that $100 billion. So definitely huge potential through better harnessing data and insights to drive our farming processes. But this stuff's expensive, and there's a need for farmers to work together in terms of data sharing to really capture those lessons. So I think this option of how do we take ag tech to scale is an opportunity. The second opportunity I see is carbon markets and ecosystem services, and Lorraine may delve into a bit more here. CSIRO reckon this could be a $40 billion opportunity for the land management sector in Australia by 2050. So huge opportunities in this space. But it's complicated. There's 47 regulated markets for carbon around the world. Numerous methodologies that are established or being developed for particularly around soil carbon, which is a level of complexity again. And risk if individual farmers step into this space on their own. You can build carbon through those good years, but when you hit that drought I showed you, all of a sudden it can go into thin air. So if you've signed a contract with Deutsche Bank to give them your carbon in 5 years and you get hit by a drought, you're in a world of pain. So could that cooperative model help with demystifying the carbon opportunity, but also sharing risk across different landscapes? I think it probably can. Another area we're thinking is around distributed energy generation. Don't need to talk about the energy transition that Australia's in at the moment. Our members aren't happy with the big industrial scale solar developments that are causing problems in different regions of New South Wales. We think there are better options looking at smaller distributed options, a 20 hectare solar farm rather than a 400 hectare one potentially. And certainly that cooperative model lends itself to opportunities in that space. And we're doing some interesting work with Norco, another great Australian cooperative, around some of those last mile energy solutions for dairy farmers that are so critically dependent on energy security, but really are a high cost to serve for the essential energies of the world. So co-ops in the energy world I think are a great opportunity too. So I might leave my remarks there, Sam, but look forward to some discussion.
Thanks very much, Peter. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mick Veitch, MLC. I don't know what your new portfolios are. I haven't caught up in the last couple of days, but Mick was born in Gundagai. He's been a shearer. He's worked on the railways like I have. He's also worked in the disability employment sector. He's a Labor Upper House New South Wales MP. He's also been a local councillor like I have as well, so we share a couple of things. But the best thing about Mick overall is that he is passionate about cooperatives, and he's here today. He's coming tonight to our dinner, and you'll feel that passion when he speaks. So please welcome Mick Veitch, MLC, to the lecture.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. The new title is Shadow Minister for Regional New South Wales, pretty big. Shadow Minister for Agriculture, so Peter and I are going to reacquaint ourselves And just because regional New South Wales is not big enough, I've also got Shadow Minister for Western New South Wales, which I've had for 10 years, so I'm pretty out of favour with that. I live in Tumut, do a lot of travel. Shearing was quite a great gig because I used to like travelling in regional New South Wales. You could stop anywhere. It was just fantastic. This gig's actually pretty much the same. I travel all over regional New South Wales and get to stop and do things. So it's a good way to experience regional New South Wales. I'm going to sort of probably build a little bit on what Peter has been doing in his presentation. I am a fan of co-ops. So much so that 3 years ago I decided to go to Canada and look into co-ops and just how they work in Canada. Now, I won't be able to do this tonight after a couple of lemonades, but I went to Saskatoon in Saskatchewan. Try and say that a few times, so here you go. Because it is the hub of co-ops. And why did I go to Saskatchewan? Well, there's, from a public policy perspective, there's some issues in that province in Canada that are also occurring, particularly in regional New South Wales. So in regional New South Wales, we have a number of communities where there's internal migration. People are leaving the west, travelling to the east, to the coastal areas of New South Wales. And you don't have to travel up and down the coast to see that with the population growth and some of the shift in dynamics. In Saskatchewan, it's people who are fleeing the north and going down to the south. Saskatchewan's it's not on the tourist map generally in Canada. It's a shame because it's actually not a bad spot. Got a few issues, but it's not unlike a lot of other provincial governments around the world, in the Western world. And so why did I go there? Well, in 2018, if you looked at the top 100 companies based in Saskatchewan, the top 100 based in Saskatchewan by financial turnover, 33 of the 100 were co-ops. And number one, the leading company, was a co-op. Employed thousands of people and the like. I also wanted to go to Saskatoon because Professor Murray Fulton is there. If you're a fan of co-ops, you would know Murray. And you can actually do this course at Saskatchewan University, actually. He runs a co-ops MBA. And I spent a wonderful afternoon with Murray talking about co-ops and the history of co-ops in Canada and just what they do and their importance to the economic makeup of Canada, but also particularly Saskatchewan. What does the co-op sector look like in Saskatchewan? Well, it's everything. It is everything. It is energy co-ops. There are community-based co-ops, so the whole community is a co-op. There are First Nations co-ops. There are photography co-ops. So, I met with some photographers over in Saskatoon who were sick and tired of being ripped off because of the internet. They were losing their IP and hence royalties from their photographic work. They've created a co-op, and so suddenly they've been able to turn around a lot of that issue. They combine resources to work on the legalities and put in place a framework where they can essentially still do their work, but rather than one do it, they can all do it. That's just Chris Minns ringing me. Some of the community co-ops particularly in the north of Saskatchewan, are around the fact that because of the population shift, the population throughput is no longer there to sustain private enterprise in particular. But a lot of the government agencies will no longer be based there. They provide extension services. This is very similar to Western New South Wales. So the communities have set up their own co-op and they run everything. They run the grocery shop. They run the petrol station. They run the pharmacy. The community run that economy. They, because they're allowed to over there, they have the small nuclear generators, about the size of a container. They plonk them in there. They run their own energy. They're not connected to the Canadian grid. They run their own. Those co-ops are there to support those communities. Now, there's some... Saskatchewan is, when I was there in 2018, this is before a lot of the other issues, was actually on the brink of falling over, and the Canadian Federation has a process in place where the feds will come in and pick up the tab, but they had just closed down their public transport sector because they were no longer able to afford their public transport sector, which gives you a bit of an idea about the financial state of Saskatchewan. But a First Nations co-op was established to run an airline. so they could actually get air services into the northern communities, which were predominantly Indigenous communities. They were, when something shuts down in Canada, which I was quite fascinated about, there's a contrast between here and there. When something shuts down, a private enterprise leaves or whatever, over there, the first answer is, well, how can we keep that? What can we do to maintain that? But here it's actually, what can government do? There's a change in mentality. It's because it's so important, so intrinsic to their economic makeup. You have this arrangement in place. But the first thing is, what can we do? And generally, their first go-to is a cooperative model. So it works because they have the legislative framework in place to support that, and they have the financial framework in place to support that. In Quebec, there's a co-ops bank underwritten by the government, by the provincial government. It just makes it easier for financing co-ops. And so my afternoon with Murray was talking about just how the cooperative movement and mutual movement grew in Canada, but particularly in Saskatchewan, and what he saw as the future of the co-ops. They don't go through the demutualisation process in Canada. Their co-ops are so intrinsic to what they do, they stay. There's a great story about the workers' co-op. There's the brewery in Saskatoon, Great Western, not Great Northern for Australia, but Great Western, had been purchased by Milwaukee Brewing, I think it was from memory, back in the 1970s. They'd shelled it out. They'd essentially on-sold all of the good equipment to other brewers, and they were essentially closing down the biggest employer at that time in Saskatoon. At the sort of the cataclysmic moment, there were 40 employees, and they were about to be essentially shut down. And so 16 of these employees on the floor one day decided that they had to do something about this, otherwise they were going to lose, one, their job, and two, their favourite beverage. And so they created a workers' co-op. It is now, or in 2018, it was the largest brewer in Canada. They had turned it around, and their signature drink is the 16, which refers to the 16 workers on the floor who went through the process of creating the workers' co-op. So can you get an idea here about how important co-ops are to Canada? Now what I'll say is, and this is the big thing that blew me away, and it's actually happening right now in New South Wales. I've had a couple of conversations with people about this. The biggest co-op in North America, anyone know? The biggest co-op in North America. The Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers are the largest co-op in North America. And they've got a wonderful arrangement. So the NFL, when they issue franchises, there are very strict rules around governance. You can have no more than 5 directors, all the rest of it. And then there's an exclusion clause just for the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers have 120,000 members. Their end-of-year dividend is determined on how many games you turn up to. So essentially, they could be playing the worst footy in the whole of the country, but they still play in front of packed stadiums because you've got to turn up to get your end-of-year dividend. There's 120,000 members. The stadium holds about 85,000. So it's fully subscribed every game. So what they've done now, they've actually struck an arrangement where if you turn up to watch a training session, that's the equivalent of 25% of a full game. So people, they're now training in front of 25,000 people. Like, this is a model. It's a model for sport. Now, what do I say? It's happening in New South Wales. I'm not sure how public this is, but I know there's been some discussions around trying to save the Central Coast Mariners. And one of the things they're looking at is a co-op. And they're looking at the Green Bay Packer model. Can you see the difference? My presentation's actually about, can you see the difference? In Canada, it's the go-to model because legislators have created the legislative framework and the financial framework to support that. It's in the education system. Like, you go through schools in Canada, you understand it's a part of doing business, the cooperative model. They have an MBA in cooperatives at Saskatoon in Saskatchewan University. So then you look at that model and you look at what happens here. In the last 30 years, up until very recently, there has been a move away from the cooperative model. Now, I think the cooperative model, post-pandemic, post-drought, post-bushfire, post a lot of things, for some of the communities in Western New South Wales, where they have got to redevelop, redefine, reconstruct their economies, this is the model. This is the saviour. But it needs legislative support to do that. I can just envisage First Nations people in Western New South Wales running community-based co-ops. I can see, some of the goat farmers in Western New South Wales who've got issues around transport logistics, for instance, with a transport co-op. I can see communities, the Blaney to Dumondrel rail line that's been looked at now for the last 15 years through 3 business studies. Not one of those business studies have looked at a cooperative model. I can see the local councils forming a co-op to run that line. Like, these are the sort of things that we should be talking about, that we should be looking at. But the legislative arrangements in New South Wales are such at the moment that we can't quite get there. We've got to change that conversation, folks. We've got to change that dialogue. I crafted the Labor Party's co-op policy for the 2019 election. I'm proud to say that we were the only political party that actually had a co-ops policy for the last state election. Now, it may not have been flash, but it was certainly better than the others because they didn't have any. And I stand up regularly in Shadow Cabinet and in our caucus room to talk about the importance of co-ops. They have a role to play. They are under-supported. They should be better supported. And when it comes to regional New South Wales, in my view, they have an important role in the reconstruction and the redevelopment of our regional economies. And we shouldn't walk away from that. Now, the last bit of thing I'll do, I don't have slides, you can tell. But I know, and this is rude, but I reckon if you picked up your phone and Googled the top 100 companies in Saskatchewan, the current listing will come up because they release it in March each year. The number is 26. There's been a reduction post the pandemic. And that number 1 company I spoke about is now number 2. They've been toppled. In Saskatchewan, it's a population of about 1 million people. 10,000 people are employed directly by co-ops. Now, I'm not advocating we go all the way to the Saskatchewan model, but I'll tell you what, we can learn a lot from the way they do cooperatives in Canada, and particularly in places like Saskatchewan, because it's what's going to save that province. And I'll be happy to take questions at some point after. It's good to see some familiar faces. Where's the Fisherman's Co-op? Like, can I just say, you're driving down the coast and you go buy a piece of fish, you've got to go to the Fisherman's Co-op. Like, those co-ops are critical to those local economies. It's a very good example of how co-ops survive and how they interact in regional economies. Go buy a piece of fish from the co-op.
We need champions like Mick in our parliaments. Next to speak is Tony Hill. He's the Executive Chair of the Australian Holistic Management Co-op, a new cooperative formed in the last couple of years that we've supported from the beginning. Tony teaches holistic management in New South Wales. He's an accredited professional with the Savory Institute. He's got a diverse background in economics, policy making, regional development, ecology and biodiversity, and he's worked in a number of government connected roles and cooperative research centres. He is the founder of their Land to Market Australia project, incorporating ecological outcome verification. And I'll give you the floor, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great to be here today. And I just want to acknowledge that we're standing on Aboriginal land, and I was very grateful for the welcome to country that we had this morning. So we just need to keep our minds focused on that question. Also, after this morning's session, I'm still trying to calculate, if I've got these numbers right, how many teaspoons it would take to deliver 12,000 tonnes of food, was it? I don't know whether I had that right. But I'm also very pleased to see on Peter's last slide the question of ecosystem services for farmers, and I'm not sure whether that's been calculated in or out of the projected $100 billion turnover for agriculture. But Sam, you heard this here first. If you think that the carbon market is hot at the moment, just wait for the ecosystem services market. It will be a very big thing. And that's one of the areas that our co-op is working in. But when the organisers talked to me about this session, I thought I was going to get the whole kind of hour and a half to talk to you about this. And now that I've seen the other speakers and their calibre, I'm very honoured to be actually invited to be part of this. The bad news for your point of view is that what I say next will be just scratching the surface, but I've been given a mission here, which is to promote the workshop coming up this afternoon at 2:30 when we'll be able to get to go through it in much more detail. So please mark that down on your day's calendar. Anyway, to the slides, see if I can work this. Our topic is to talk about food production, farming for producer co-ops, relationship with climate, and more importantly, from my point of view, how co-ops can help the world achieve these UN Sustainability Development Goals. Quick straw poll in the room. Who's heard of SDGs before today's session? About 50% of you. Very good. All right. The International Co-op Alliance got into the game with these UN SDGs, which were developed in 2015. How many years ago was that? Maybe about 6 at least. The ICA is the global voice of our co-op movement, and according to its website, it is committed to educating cooperatives about SDGs. So at the moment, the progress on that mission is a little bit slow from the Australian point of view, and I'm grateful to Sam and the organisers of this conference for putting the topic on the agenda for our discussions today. So that's fantastic. What are SDGs? Well, I know that there's 17 of them, but you might wonder why the word sustainable is there against all of them when you might think that maybe 15 is a focus of us, life on the land. 14 is a focus, life below the water. And somewhere in there, number 2, zero hunger, important for the agriculture sector. My conclusion out of those 17 SDGs is that the UN has taken the right approach in thinking about those questions in what I would call a holistic context. So it's very hard to have no poverty without adequate food. It's very hard to have a peaceful community without adequate agriculture and without a sustainable world in which we live. So these 17 goals fit together. Someone did ask me this morning, where's world peace on that list? And I think it might be number 18, but at any rate, let's see how we go with that. Click, click, click. So what has the ICA done for this? Well, it's launched the campaign of Co-ops for 2030. There's that magic number again. And what they're trying to do is help co-ops to learn more about SDGs and then to commit themselves to pledges about how we contribute as co-ops to these SDGs. So there's your teaspoon again. Every co-op making pledges to contribute to achieving SDGs. And can the UN do it by themselves? No, they can't. Do they have to depend on us to do it? Yes, they do. And then after the commitments comes the reporting on the progress. So there is a whole website on that stuff. But what's happened so far in Australia? Well, the Sweeter Banana Cooperative has stepped forward, Oric has stepped forward, the Co-Housing Co-op and CBH has stepped forward. And if I add up those numbers, I think I get to 8 pledges for Australia. 1 pledge per, I don't know, 3 or 4 million people. Maybe not even that many. So, not too much action in this space from Australia yet, but we hope today to make a change to that. So, my question is, can we have an Australian co-ops campaign, that's co-ops with the hyphen, campaign to support the Co-ops 2030 initiative? And would we be able to get each co-op, or maybe groups of co-ops, to coordinate their own campaign in this area? And there's a hidden agenda here, because Sam has said to me that if we can get some progress on that, if we can do better than Vladimir Putin, and who's the other guy, in their mission, maybe we can get a statement from this event today that we can announce to the rest of the community that co-ops are standing front and centre behind this SDG initiative. What a good thing to do. What a good thing to do. So that's why we're having the workshop this afternoon, to try and answer those questions. Where do we sit in the scheme of things? I just wanted to, in case you're kind of still wondering about this, why would it be co-ops that can do something about this? I've got 4 reasons. They're labelled priorities, but the takeaway from that set of words, developed from this Ipsos poll in 2020, 70% of Australians expect their government to make protection of the environment a priority, and when recovering from coronavirus. 70% of Australians are behind that. And so that means to me that our consumers are strongly mentally in this space. They might be still wondering what they can do, but they are in this space. Here's another group. Has anybody seen Mateus recently? Scott did. It's because he was in Europe. But the OECD came out with this statement in 2020, and in amongst the various things that we need to do to prevent vulnerability to pandemics was efforts to safeguard our biodiversity. That's the OECD, that's the Rich Kids Club. That's important news. And here's a scary one, and I hate this slide in many ways, but this group of academics have come up with the conclusion that 19 Australian ecosystems are already collapsing. And my wife said, what does that mean? And it's on the next slide. But the short answer is they are unlikely to recover from their current circumstances. Now, for ecosystems, read life support systems, you know, and the most important life support system is the one that supports us, of course, because we think of ourselves first. And here's the other scary one. People like to look at graphs like that and go, okay, we're all talking about whether we can top out at 1.5 or maybe 2 degrees of global warming. There's the carbon dioxide component, you know, and in my world, that's all contributing to things like droughts, megafires, pestilence, floods, and food security, and maybe even the mice plague, who knows. So the answer to that in our world is regenerative agriculture. If you can take the 50% of Australia's land mass that is managed for agriculture and improve the ecology of that landscape while maintaining production, you've hit a really sweet spot. And that's where Peter's ecosystem services come in. Very, very important. So what have we done in this regard with our co-op? Well, our co-op was established to do this mission of implementing a verification process for the ecological health of farmland. For the first time, to be able to give farmers robust information about whether the ecology was improving or not. And for ecology in that sentence, read the engine that supports their agricultural production. If they've got healthy ecology, they get healthy production and probably more of it, and that will make a major contribution to whether it's $30 billion by 2030 or whether it's $100 billion by 2030 for the whole country. On top of this verification process, we've then built the branding of Land to Market Australia so that the rest of the community can communicate with what is fundamentally a very complex topic of ecological health and make it simple for everybody to get in touch with it. That's what we do. So how do we know if farming is truly regenerative? If you're serious about regenerative agriculture, I would argue you need to get into ecological outcome verification. You need to have that robust information. So back to the SDGs, we probably tick boxes in something like 50% of those boxes by the time you extend the argument a little bit. So there's the plug, workshop today. I think it's 2:30 if I'm correct with the program. Yep. It's all about co-ops and sustainability development goals. It's not about telling, it's about listening, and it's about co-design. How do we work together? I will be happy to lead it. I do have more information for you than what I've just been able to go through. And what we're doing is working towards a more substantial contribution from Australia's co-ops and hopefully writing some text for the communique from this assembly. Thank you, Sam.
Okay. Lorraine has been very patient online, hopefully. We can bring her up. Lorraine Gordon is the founder of the National Regenerative Agriculture Alliance that's based at Southern Cross University, and is also the Director of Strategic Projects up there. Many of us, there you are, Lorraine, hello. Many of us would know Lorraine. She was also the Director of the Federal Government's Farming Together program, Federal Government funded Farming Together program. She's been awarded the 2018 Rural Community Leader of the Year for her work with farmers, and a series of other awards. Very much appreciate her being able to make time for us today to be here. And over to you, Lorraine. Hope you've been listening and hearing what's been said so far.
Thank you, Sam, and hello everyone. I'm very sorry that I actually can't be there today in person. I would have loved to have caught up with everyone, so I'm quite disappointed I can't be there in person. But anyway, my presentation will be short and sweet, but hopefully quite punchy, because I'm sure that you get it feeling a little bit talked out by this stage. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully that will. Oh, Tony, can you enable me to screen share, please? Thank you. Excellent. So can everybody see that okay? Hello?
Can you try it again, Lorraine?
Yeah. Is it sharing or not?
No, not yet.
Just try it again.
Security is where you allow screen sharing.
How are you going now?
We're good now. Yep.
Okay, excellent. Alrighty, so what I've been asked to talk about today is probably pretty similar to Tony's, some of the latest issues in food production, farming, and for producer co-ops, and of course our relationship with the climate, which isn't going so great at this point. I am a farmer. I had to show a couple of pictures of my farm. I guess you could say that's my utopia, and that's what I constantly strive for, is that sort of biodiversity. So where are we at? What I want to just touch on, and like we don't have a lot of time to talk about what is quite a complex issue, is the market mechanisms that are going to drive change. And that's going to include things like ecosystem services, carbon farming, biodiversity credits, and so forth. Where are we at now? And this is really important. We've touched on it a bit with some of the other speakers. But basically, the breakdown of planetary boundaries is real. So just to give you a quote from some of the leading agronomists and academics, and this is from academics: agriculture is in crisis. Soil health is collapsing, and biodiversity faces the sixth mass extinction. So scientists are predicting that we have a maximum now of 9 years to reverse the degradation of our planet. Farmers have a huge role to play in the solution, be it through landscape restoration, carbon sequestration to reduce greenhouse emissions, or providing quality nutritious food for the human race. Australia has felt the effects of climate change, and I can tell you I have firsthand, through recently experiencing the longest drought in known history. And unfortunately, drought has become the norm. We've experienced the largest fires, leaving a trail of devastation and biodiversity loss, the extinction of more species than any other country in the world, and the loss of our most valuable asset, our topsoil. which affects our capacity to produce food. Our Great Barrier Reef has unfortunately hit its tipping point, so there is no going back for it. And the breakdown of our biodiversity is now recognised as the reason we will continue to experience pandemics such as COVID-19. Make no mistake, humanity's survival is at risk. So now that I've managed to depress everybody in the room, and I didn't mean to do that, there are some positives. And the positives are all about farmers. So whilst often we get blamed as the cause, and unduly so in many respects, it is being said that we could be 90% of the solution. So that's what I just want to very briefly focus on. I'm going to talk about some of these market mechanisms that are now in place that are going to drive change, and the role that co-ops and mutuals might play in that space. So for those that aren't quite across the carbon space, it's quite complicated, particularly soil carbon. This is a very simple snapshot of the various steps and processes involved in being a carbon farmer and what you have to do. And I'm just going to focus for a start on the first step, which is being carbon ready. So you do end up having an assessment done just to see whether you are the type of farmer that can actually sequester carbon. And this is a really important point, because not everybody is the type of farmer that can do that. And I don't want to talk too much about regenerative agriculture, because Tony's touched on it, and that would be a whole nother presentation on the principles and practices of regen ag. But I do want to say this: what doesn't sequester carbon are these things: paddocks of bare soil and lack of ground cover, monocrops with lack of biodiversity, spraying out paddocks prior to sowing new pastures and crops, set stocking, overuse, and I want to just emphasise overuse, not no use, overuse of synthetic chemicals, fertilisers and pesticides, and over-tillage and disturbance of the soil. So if your practices involve those sorts of things, you are taking on a lot of risk in walking down that carbon farming path. If your practices are truly regenerative practices, then you're really setting yourself up for a very exciting future. And really, it's a whole new enterprise. I like to call myself a carbon farmer that actually uses cattle to sequester carbon. I'm no longer a cattle farmer that happens to do carbon farming. And I can see in the future that the first thing you will call yourself would be a carbon farmer. So there's all the steps. Now, the interesting part is where in all of those steps would I think that the concept of carbon co-ops come into play? There are many ways of realising value, and I'm going to use carbon farming, soil carbon farming, as an example, because it's probably the one that I've been most, how can you put it, down a rabbit hole, delving into. But there are many different ways of realising value through carbon farming. So, of course, you need to register. You need to register your project with the Emissions Reduction Fund. And if you don't do that and end up sequestering carbon in the future, you can't retrospectively go back and make money out of it. So you'd be nuts not to register your project. There are many ways of selling your carbon. You don't have to sell to the government. You should be registered with the government, but you don't have to sell. And you don't have to go into forward contracts, because carbon, the price of carbon, is only going in one direction, and that is up. So anybody that I think stitches themselves up in forward contracts in this space is really doing themselves an injustice. And of course, there's these secondary markets, corporate markets, in addition to the government markets that you can access. The other options you have is that you can add a history of your farm, the history of the flora and the fauna, and the good practices that you do in the biodiversity space. And that really brings in the idea of carbon plus. So you can actually be a carbon farmer, and you can also have biodiversity credits in another part of your farm happening at the same time. And then you might have other beautiful stories to wrap around that. For instance, you may have a verification program such as Land to Market, where you can give that tick that you're actually a regenerative farmer. So then you're starting to really be quite a valuable asset to the corporate world that want to be able to put your story in their lifts and their elevators and in their, in the front of house, to be able to say, look, here's how we offset our footprint because we're invested in this farm, and look at the wonderful things this farm does. And of course, like I mentioned, you don't have to go into contracts straight away, because on the spot market in the future, carbon will be worth quite a lot of money. So this is a very exciting, on the positive, this is a very exciting space for farmers into the future. But you cannot do it. You cannot sequester carbon without using regenerative practices. So carbon co-ops has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? And I think there's a huge future here in this space, particularly when you start to talk economies of scale. So really, I used to say that the magic number that I use to make it viable to go alone in the carbon space is you need to have about 400 hectares registered. Now, even if your farm is much larger than that, it doesn't mean that all the areas are going to be eligible for soil carbon farming. And so in many cases, bringing farms together makes it more of a viable product to the market. So aggregating market power. You can also reduce transaction costs, because as a co-op or as a collaborative, you're not reinventing the wheel. There's already a footprint in place on how you do this, and the sort of paperwork you need to fill in, and the forms and so forth. So standardising documentation is another plus. So the marketing side of things has huge potential, particularly if farmers come together in a bioregion, but also from an education and training space. So this is a really complex area. And most farmers do not have the time to delve, or they're exhausted by the end of the day to sit through all the paperwork and administration that's involved with these processes. So a collaboration like a co-op can sort of cut through all of that, and you're on the journey together. So I think the education, training and farmer support that can come through that co-op structure is one of the biggest pluses of carbon co-ops, as well as that potential for marketing a great bioregion story. So there's a list. You can see I can see a lot of potential benefits. And also one of the biggest benefits is you can actually employ your own administrator. So through the co-op, you can have that office administration doing all of that ugly paperwork and auditing and so forth that's involved. So lots of benefits, and I'm already through the Farming Together team and the Regenerative Ag Alliance at Southern Cross, we're having conversations with private forestry plantation groups, different farming groups on, is there the potential there for them to set up a co-op to go down this path. So I will just touch very briefly. We're talking co-ops, but of course there's some exciting stuff happening in the mutual space as well. And the new Farmers Mutual, Regen Farmers Mutual, that's being established is exciting. And what that does is just take away the fact that the middleman is potentially at the moment making a lot of money. There's a lot of, I'd say, sharks out there. You need to be very careful. And some of the profit takings from soil carbon farming are hitting 30% of profits. Whilst they pay for all your upfront costs, they certainly take it out at the other end. And, you're really, how can I put it, in bed with these strangers for a long time, say 25 years. So, it's a partnership you damn well want to get right. So I think the concept of having a farmers mutual around ecosystem services and in the environmental stewardship space is a really good one. And there's some of what our farmers mutual is hoping to be able to get for their members. So exciting times there. So back to this lovely picture of the steps involved in soil carbon farming. I've just highlighted in red, and you could argue all of these steps have a huge role to play in a co-op situation. But these ones really stand out to me. That are you carbon ready assessment and appraisal could be done in a group setting, taking them through the regen practices, taking them through what are some of the things in this bioregion, the practices that would suit this group of farmers. So that cuts a lot of expense straight away. Being able to consider all the different market mechanisms that are out there, the different markets that you can actually sell into, is another area that can cut a lot of time and expense by going through a co-op structure. And then there's things like the annual review of management plans. Now, that can be a scary process, as can the auditing. So having that support that a co-op can offer to be able to help their farmers with those sort of highly administrational processes and making sure that everything's in place takes away so much risk and so much expense, because you are signing up to a long-term contract here. You have a caveat on your land when you go into carbon farming. Now, caveat doesn't mean a bad thing, because it can actually add value to your farm, but you need to be able to deliver on that. And as we all know, and I'm talking to the converted here, we are better as a whole than as one trying to go down this path. I've also highlighted in the marketing space, where a mutual, for instance, or a co-op can really come to play, because all the work of finding those corporates and finding the best marketing opportunity can be done through that structure. I've been involved with a group, Ebor Beef, for some, 30 years. In fact, I think I was one of the initiators 30 years ago of Ebor Beef. It is a co-op, but it doesn't always do all the things a co-op can do. And the fact is that where it really comes to play is when we market our beef. And we basically get 20 cents a kilo more because of our size, our scale, and the fact that we employ a full-time coordinator that just does the negotiating with the markets for us. So when it comes to a co-op or a mutual, I think that is a huge plus. I'm going to just quickly finish up here. For those that are looking in the carbon farming space, I've mentioned some of these things, just a few tips. Always baseline, do register. Know that prices can range from $15 or $16 with the government to $45 internationally if you look at the markets in Korea. There's government, there's corporate markets. Whilst you're undertaking the process, and this is really important to remember, when you're doing regenerative farming practices, you're also improving your triple bottom line whilst you're sequestering carbon. So the cost of going into carbon farming can very quickly be offset by the fact that you're over a period of time, particularly if part of that period of time is drought affected, that your bottom line will increase. And that's probably another presentation, and that's actually part of my research. Anyway, and research is of course underway in all the different practices that can build carbon and the methodologies around that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the panel questions. I did just want to make one very quick observation, and Peter from New South Wales Farmers was advocating for the fact that we really need a farm management insurance product that looks at multi-peril farm insurance. Through the Farming Together program, we actually supported a mutual, a farmers mutual in this space. It was a very tough journey, and a lot of people were quite frazzled by the end of this journey. And I just wanted to flag, if anyone is considering going down this space, please look at the lessons that were learned from that experience. The problem with multi-peril insurance is that it does encourage fraudulent behaviour. And I think that's one of the reasons that some of the big insurance companies steer clear of it, because they have been burnt. And the moment you start up a mutual in the insurance space, let me tell you, the big boys come after you, and they're savage. And so they will try and undercut at any cost. And I'm being bluntly honest here because we've experienced, I was quite involved with setting up that mutual. Climate change does bring with it a lot of risk. So again, that's why I think some of the bigger players have really steered clear of the whole multi-peril space. But I think it's a really good discussion to have with the panel that we have here today. So thank you, everyone. I'll stop sharing and shut up, so to speak, so everyone else can talk. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lorraine. We've got about 10 minutes for questions, queries of our speakers, a fantastic, diverse range of presentations, just like our cooperative sector. Yep. Up to the mic, please, as before.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, look, an excellent session and a good broad range. Yeah, with the carbon pricing, and as Lorraine said, it's only going in one direction. The euro price to CO2 is now at 57 euro per tonne of CO2, and that equates to about $265 for a tonne of Australian dollars for a tonne of organic carbon. So it's really gone through the roof already. And I suppose one of the big problems is that we're not capitalising, we're not really in that market. But anyway, just like to sort of say that price is really important. I don't know why I'm so nervous, but anyway. And then just with Peter's deal, there are lots of ways that we can increase our production, but more importantly, our profitability and also our contribution towards increasing biodiversity and creating healthy ecosystem through multi-streaming. And yeah, just like to think that the New South Wales farmers would sort of start heading a bit more in that direction because there's more money in it. And yeah, just if we could adopt a policy, or hopefully you can adopt a policy where we can, yeah, but basically sort of head in that direction. And I don't know whether there's any resistance to it. So I suppose my question is, do you think there's any resistance to it?
Yeah, they should. Yep.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And it was raised earlier whether, I think, Tony, you raised it, whether the carbon and ecosystem services opportunities are factored into the 100 billion or the 30 billion at a state level. Yes, they are to an extent in the NFF plan. Resistance, look, yeah, I mean, there's always a range of views in any industry, no doubt. Diffusion of innovation sort of suggests there'll be early adopters and so on. I think things like the really hard drought we've just been through in many ways are the best marketing for some of these regenerative practices that you can ask for. Farmers looking over neighbours' fences and seeing the benefits of retaining moisture in the landscape, of slowing down stream flows, of keeping ground cover. So look, I think the majority of our members, and we're about sort of 6,300 members across New South Wales, I think are certainly very very open-minded to a lot of the regenerative principles. I think, as Lorraine's rightly called out, we're concerned about some of the early players in this carbon space, sort of the offers to sign up now for these great opportunities, sort of not knowing that you're locked in for 5 years and the price will increase, and someone's probably taking a healthy slice of anything you might gain in that. So we're really interested in the model you've talked about today, Lorraine. We're thinking in a similar space. I think we need to get farmers good advice on the realities and the risks of these opportunities, and to support them to step into to these new streams of income over the course of the next decade.
Thanks, Peter. Do you want to comment, Lorraine? Or?
Yeah, I mean, there is some pushback when we start to talk about regenerative practices, and I'm just looking at a paper here that just calls it out as just good farming practice. Well, no, it's not. It's a whole new way of thinking. It's a whole new paradigm. It looks at things, regenerative agriculture looks at things in a holistic context. So I don't think there's pushback so much for the market mechanisms and carbon farming and biodiversity and the role that biodiversity plays, but there certainly is some pushback at times in the regenerative space, and a lot of that is misinformation and miscommunication. The amount of, I've spoken to some pretty conservative dairy farmers down in South Australia, and once I told them these are the principles of regen ag and these are the practices, and they said, oh God, we're doing 2 or 3 of those practices we're already doing. And I said, well, guess what, guys, you're on the regenerative journey. And I think once farmers understand that, they all realise it's not a them and us. It's a journey for all of us to take part in, and you actually never really reach your destination. And that's the big difference when it comes to regenerative agriculture. It's about continuous improvement. It's about being extremely comfortable in ambiguity, not thinking you can control everything, but actually working with nature and accepting that humans are actually part of nature. We're not separate from these scenarios. We actually are the biggest influencers on what happens in the landscape. So there are some very distinctive differences between sustainability and regenerative practices. There's big differences between regenerative agriculture and organics. Organics is very black and white. This is in and this is out. You can't do that, but you can do this. Regenerative agriculture is not about that, and Tony's better to speak on this stuff. The fantastic thing about their verification program is it's about continuous improvement and understanding that that particular farm is really 100% dedicated to continually improving landscape function. So, I think the pushback, as always, is about miscommunication and lack of knowledge of what regenerative agriculture is, and getting principles and practices all muddled up. They're very different things. So maybe Tony can sort of enlighten on that one a bit more.
I'm not going to let him. We've got to.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
Yeah. He's had a go. Keela.
It's really inspiring to hear about the growth of regenerative farming. Starting off with permaculture and the Peter Andrews system and regenerative farming, I want to thank people for talking about these things and the fact that we have to observe nature and work with nature. I wanted to ask Peter Arkell, what percentage of the farmers that you're involved with are using regenerative farming or permaculture or biodynamic farming, please?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't have a definitive answer, and I certainly would agree with Lorraine in terms of really building broader understanding of these concepts. We're quick to use a lot of these phrases of different types of production systems, but I think in the majority of our members, these concepts aren't always clearly understood. So we've all got a job to try and build awareness in that sense. Look, yeah, a lot of members are choosing to evolve their production systems in those directions. You know, beef people sort of looking at EU and now UK marketing opportunities are thinking actively around organic status and avoiding growth promotants and things like that. Look, the goat industry was mentioned by Mick earlier on is a great organic industry in terms of exports. So, look, a lot of producers are sort of weighing up the opportunities that exist to diversify their production systems into these different areas. That's definitely happening. But yeah, I mean, a lot of our members are multi-generational family farming businesses who have an absolute vested interest in improving their natural capital and have done so over decades and decades. So I think the nice thing about the last drought we lived through is when you were driving past farms in regional New South Wales, you weren't necessarily seeing huge dust storms. We were fortunate not to see starving livestock as we may have seen in the 80s, and I think that's all reflective of how these principles are starting to be more broadly applied across majority of farms certainly in New South Wales.
Okay, I can see more and more people getting up for questions, but at the moment I'm going to give two, and we'll start with Jeff. Although you've had a go already this morning, Jeff, you are an organic farmer, so I'll let you...
My question is for Lorraine. Lorraine, Jeff Bugden's my name. I'm the director of the Pecan Farmers Cooperative of Australia. You mentioned carbon farming cooperatives. We already have a cooperative that has 20 or more pecan nut farmers. I was talking to another gentleman here today. He's a lamb cooperative and he's got 80 odd farmers. We're always looking and thinking as a board of the cooperative of how we can work harder and work better for our farmers. Rather than start another cooperative, wouldn't it be? Is there a way we can induct this carbon farming cooperative into our pecan farmers cooperative already and just add it or offer it as to our farmers as another incentive to be a member of the cooperative? What do you think about that?
Oh, look, excellent question. And I should have mentioned it. Absolutely. You've already got a cooperative structure in place. You don't need to reinvent the wheel and start another cooperative just to do carbon farming. I just think it's really another incentive, and it's just another string to your bow for your whole cooperative. And I mean, I've been talking to the Northern Meat Cooperative about actually this subject, about actually taking their farmers down this regenerative and carbon farming path, and they've already got their membership. They've already got, they've been through the hard yards. So it's very easy for existing co-ops to now start to explore this space as an added benefit for their members.
There's nothing your co-op can't do for you. I'm just going to give Richard one more. Sorry, Deb and Dave, I've seen you move, but we'll have to finish. So, Richard O'Leary.
Thank you, Sam. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Lorraine, a question to you. But before I go to that question, I just want to make a comment on what Peter from New South Wales Farmers made a comment about generational change and how it's actually, to attract our next generation. We're fourth generation farmers, more than that if you take way back. But fourth generation on our particular farm, and we've put a proposition from a family point of view through Southern Cross University relating to our balance on our properties, and that's private native forests as well as generally trying to obviously capture carbon and move through that. But the intergenerational side of it is that if generations want to be handing on, they've got to address the issues of now. And our young people certainly are leading the way relating to our climate change issues and particularly about sustainability on our land. So if the oldies ignore that, they won't have farms in the future. It was very easy for my dad, for instance, who farmed our property for about 50 years. He could actually say, I'm not going to do that. But my generation, we've actually had to accept that in a lot of ways legislation hasn't helped us, but with the new codes relating to our balance of clearing and private native forests and set-asides, we've certainly put 20% of our land as set aside, but on top of that, of course, it gives us more opportunity to doing a lot more with our soils. So, Lorraine, where to, relating to the balance of our future generations, can we have, for instance, timber operations, beef cattle operations, and can we actually capture that space?
Good question, Richard. And it is a point I should have made myself, that, look, the next generation of farmers, the younger farmers, absolutely get this stuff. My kids just get it. We're on a steeper journey than what our kids are. There is no question to them about the perils of climate change and what we're in for. They're quite frustrated in lack of action, and we've seen that unfold. So I have a lot of hope in the next generation of farmers that they will absolutely turn things around. And I guess the other thing to recognise is that those farms that aren't willing to change their practices, in all honesty, they're just not going to be farming in the next few years. It's as simple as that. The tipping point has started and they just won't be around, which opens up so many opportunities for younger farmers to come in, and we're starting to see that now. So, and I've heard young people say often, you know, we don't care for sustaining, we want it regenerated, we want it fixed. You guys stuffed it up and now we've got to deal with it. So they're quite angry, and but in the same context, they're quite determined to sort it out. So in that way, there's a lot of hope that the next generation of younger farmers will not be farming the way that we have in the past. So it is a good point to note. Thanks, Richard.
Okay, that's it for now. Can I ask you just to thank our speakers again for coming today? It's lunchtime. Lunch goes to 1:30, and then we really break up into some interesting workshops and events. Just to give you a bit of an idea, but it's all in the program. From 1:30, if you want to talk co-op governance with me, we'll be up in the room 4 and 5 up this way. We're going to have a procession of workshops in the auditorium from 1:30. And at 2:30, Tony's one that he relentlessly plugs. And then at 3:30, Hannah Rose, a charity lawyer, is going to be there for co-ops who want to talk about charity status. So there's that going on. In the Heritage Room, near to where lunch is out here, there'll be cooperative stories all afternoon. Some fantastic presentations from the wild diversity of cooperative enterprise will be on there, 15-minute or so blocks, so you can always check in there and hear something new. But there's that big diversity of the afternoon, and then at 4:30 we'll be back in here to wrap up the day before drinks. So have some lunch, network, and come and hopefully it'll be a very enriching afternoon for everybody. Thanks very much.